Evening, folks. It's often the case when you're creating a composite image with a figure in it that you need to cut the figure out and then apply a shadow in a direction commensurate where the light is. So that's what we're going to tackle in this tutorial. And we're going to start with this image of the legs, which, as you can see, already has a shadow. The first step is always to isolate the figure from the background, which in this case is pretty easy. Choose any selection tool. In this case, the quick selection tool brings up these boxes: select subject or select and mask. In this case, just choose a select subject. As you can see, it does a pretty good job straight away of making a selection. One or two little areas in the image need a helping hand. You can use a lasso or the polygonal or any other tool that suits you. Just take in the bits that you want and delete those that you don't want. Just work your way around switching between tools until you've got the result that you want. Once the selection's finished, we need to duplicate the selection onto a new layer. So Ctrl J does the job, and with the layers panel you can see the new cutout as finished. We can add a white background layer at this point. Just create a new layer, and then Ctrl Backspace fills the new layer with the background colour, which in this case is white. Having made the cutout, we can now start to look at cutting out the shadow that's on the background layer. This could be useful or not, depending on the circumstances. So I'm going to just use the rotate tool to get the image into a more comfortable position for using with the pen and the tablet, and then just using the lasso tool, I'm just going to cut out the shadow. You can see this is a lot easier than it was on Tuesday night when I was juggling with the microphone and the keyboard and not being able to get into the position I needed to with the tablet. Incidentally, if you don't have a tablet, it really is useful when you're working in Photoshop for any length of time. You can talk amongst yourselves while I just get this dumping removed. Okay, well that's the selection made. You don't have to be perfect because it is a shadow at the end of the day, and we will make some Gaussian blur on it. We need to duplicate that shadow now onto another layer. So a Ctrl J gives us the shadow on its own, and we can move that up to underneath the cutout, and there we go. We've now got the shadow. It's not perfect. We can make a few adjustments at this stage. Just use the clone tool just to fill that little gap in, or whatever tools you might need, of course. The other side seems to be okay. So what we need to do now is to get rid of the colour cast that's in there just by desaturating, and then just add a bit of Gaussian blur to blur those edges up a bit. Don't need to go mad. And that's it. Yeah, there's just a little bit of touching up to do there on the shadow. and at the other side. We could spend some time lightening the shadow further away from the legs and darken it near where the legs are or the shoes are and add in a contact patch, but for this we'll just go to transform, select the perspective and just show you dragging it about, and so that you can adjust the direction and so on of the shadow. Beyond that, I think we'll leave doing those things until the next part of the tutorial. So now we want to create a new shadow rather than using that existing one, so we can delete the shadow layer and the background layer. And now we're left with the cutout. So we'll increase the size of the canvas by using the crop tool, and then again fill in that background layer with white. And then we can create a selection by clicking on the layer thumbnail whilst holding the control key down. That makes us a selection of the cutout, which we can then duplicate with Control J. We now want to fill that layer with black, so again holding the control key down, click on the layer, or the thumbnail rather, and this time using Alt backspace we can fill it with black. We now need to use the transform tool to flip the layer vertically, and then we can move it into position to contact the soles of the shoe. Obviously it's only going to contact one of them, so we need to adjust that or warp that to get it to where we want it. So we'll go into the puppet warp tool. I've got the grid turned off so you can't see that it's actually active, but it is. If I just click that you can see the grid, and then off again. And we'll just go in. Oh well, hang on, we're going to drag those points together. So we'll put some anchor points on to start with, just to stop it dragging the whole thing around. I think that'll do. We'll just go up and... So now we can put a point on the heel and on the sole of the shoe and just drag that into the position we want. And similarly on to the shoe. Just drag it to where you want it to be. Okay, we can now crop the image to as appropriate, just to get rid of that blank bottom bit. It's probably appropriate at this stage just to do a bit of housekeeping and rename the layers. So just rename the shadow layer and the legs layer. And then we can move the shadow layer below the legs where it should be. And now we want to just apply a bit of Gaussian blur to that shadow. So now let's see about adjusting the shadows. There's a bit of white there, but first let's just apply a layer mask. Choose the gradient tool, make sure it's black to white, make sure you're on the layer mask, and then click the line in the direction you want to fade the shadow. We want it darker nearer the feet and legs and fading away as it goes away from the body. Now there's a bit of a gap between the shadow and the legs due to the Gaussian blur effect, so make sure you're on the proper layer, and then just using the move tool, that's a V, Control V, just move it up so that it's in a better position. You can also create another layer as we done here, and just add a bit of black for a contact layer. You get a black spot or black line nearer where the shadow or the figure is contacting the shadow. So, and then you just need to blur that as well. So you've blurred the main shadow and you've blurred the contact patch. And then we can just adjust the opacity to suit. That will be governed by the background of the image you're going to drop this figure into. We can now use the transform tool, choose perspective, and select the perspective you want for the image that you're heading for. Obviously it wants to be bigger further away from the body, or wider, because that's what happens. You might want to shorten the shadow if the sun is more vertical, depends on the angle. It's entirely up to you what you do from this point on. You may have to clean up a bit around where the shadow is hitting the shoes. Whoops. Use a softer brush than I was using. Don't know why the hardness is up there, but drag it down. Well, there's not much point me wasting a great deal of time on this because it's going to be different on your image, but you just need to clean that up, tidy the edges up as appropriate.